Let me ask you to take your Bibles and look with me in Genesis chapter 32. We're going to be reading from a couple of passages, but if you were here last week, you know that I introduced this series entitled Relocated. And I said that there are many different ways in which we get relocated in our life. One is geographical. And there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of strain, Dave can tell you, in moving from one place to another. We talked about that last week. What does God want us to do when we move to new places? But we can also get relocated relationally, and we're going to talk about that this morning. Spiritually, and in our own roots and values, we can get relocated. And we're going to one day be eternally relocated. We're going to talk about all those things. Today I want to talk to you about something that's very, very important. It's very personal. It's about returning to unity when relationships have been relocated. When ties have been broken. Families have been broken. Friendships have been broken. Maybe relationships in the church family have been broken. And we're going to see what God has to say to you and to me about being agents of returning to unity. So let me ask you to honor God's word by standing. Parts of these stories are going to be familiar to you, but it's really a story about Jacob and Esau. So we begin in chapter 32 in verse 6. Now the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." And Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies. For he said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. And then in verse 11, he says, deliver me, praise to God. He says, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. Now look in chapter 33. We're going to read the first 4 verses there. Then Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men were with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 maids, and he put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. God bless the reading of his word. Thank you. Please be seated. Let me give you a little bit of background context so you'll understand more about what's going on. In the book of Genesis, we have 3 great sections of stories about the patriarchs: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, we had the story of Abraham and how he left his home in Ur of Chaldees and God led him into the promised land. His son Isaac begins with the story of Abraham willing to offer him as sacrifice up on Mount Moriah, and then all that God did through Isaac. And third, Jacob, the third patriarch, is Jacob, whose name was going to be changed to Israel. He would be the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, when Jacob and his 2 wives, Leah and Rachel were having children. Rachel was barren for quite a while. And so she told Jacob to go into Leah. and she bore children. She began to bear children. And Rachel was still barren. Finally, the day came that she was expecting children, and lo and behold, it was twins. Jacob and Esau were twin brothers. Not identical, fraternal twins. But Esau was actually the elder brother. He was born first. And the Bible says, amazingly, that when Esau came out of the womb, Jacob reached out of the womb and grabbed the heel of his brother, Esau. And that was to be very prophetic. Names often reflect character or some prophetic future of the children. Now, Esau means hairy, and Esau was a hairy man. Jacob's name, the word Jacob, means twisted or supplanter, deceiver. It's a weird name to name your son, isn't it? But because he reached out, grabbed the heel of his brother, Jacob and his wife, Rachel, named him Jacob. It proved to be very prophetic in his life because Jacob was a supplanter. He was a deceiver. He was a trickster. And it would cause him and his brother in their relationship to be relocated, to be divided. Now, you probably know as good or better than I do that there is not much in this world that hurts worse than when relationships are broken. And we are relocated away from loved ones, away from friends, away from colleagues. So right now, I want you inside your own heart and head to get real personal. I want you to think of a time that happened to you. You got relocated. Maybe it was with a brother or sister or mom or dad or with a child or with a workmate or with a friend or somebody in this church. But somebody that was very close to you, you got separated from. And I will tell you that in this story, this is not all going to be negative. It's not all going to be depressive. That there is nothing more joyful than to be reunited with those that we have been separated from. Now, that can happen for a number of reasons. Relationships can be distanced and cooled for several different reasons. One is what we see right here in the book of Genesis with Jacob and Esau, just because of intentional maliciousness. Jacob and Esau are a perfect example of that. Jacob purposefully, intentionally did wrong to his brother. But it happens every day in our lives. You may not steal your brother's belongings. You may not run over your niece, but we betray, we gossip. You know, Baptists call that prayer requests most of the time. But we talk about people behind their back to other people. When you do that, let me tell you what that is. That is called GOSSIP, gossip. That's not prayer requesting. That's not seeking counsel. That's gossiping. And so we hear that friends or loved ones or others have betrayed us in some way, or they've gossiped about us. I'm telling you that relationships can be relocated by malicious intent. Other times it happens by innocent misunderstandings. We don't even know probably that we've offended somebody. We don't know that we said something or we said something we didn't realize would hurt anybody or anything. There was no malicious intent to it all, but offense took place. I heard about an older couple that the wife was in the kitchen and she was washing the dishes, and there was just a spark of romantic emotion that came over her, and she yelled out to her husband and she said, "Honey, I just want you to know I am so proud of you." Well, her husband was sitting in the living room and he didn't have his hearing aids on and he didn't hear clearly, so he yelled back, "Well, I think you're lousy too." Sometimes just innocent misunderstandings can happen, but separation takes place. We get relocated. Sometimes inadvertent mistakes, things that you do that you're not aware about. Years ago, not long after I came here, we were at an event. I think it was maybe the dedication of our associational offices. I don't know. It was some big event. There were a lot of people there. And in the midst of that event, there was an elderly gentleman. Now, I was a lot younger then. I was about 43 then. But he was a lot older than I am. But he came up to me and he looked at me and he says, "You don't know who I am, do you?" Now, when somebody introduces themselves that way, you know it's not heading in the right direction, right? And I looked at him and I said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I don't know you. I'm sorry. Tell me who you are." And he told me his name. And he said, "I want to tell you something, young man. You hurt me." And I said, "Well, sir, first of all, let me say I'm sorry. I don't know what I did. I don't remember you. I don't know you, but..." And he said, "Well, it happened at another church." I'm not going to mention the name. Happened at another church. They were having an anniversary celebration. You were the pastor, and there were a lot of people there. And I had been a member of that church for a long time, but had moved. I wasn't there while you were there, but I was back because of the anniversary. And anyway, I came up to introduce myself to you, and we were there talking, and somebody grabbed you, and you turned, and you never came back and finished the conversation with me. And it offended me. And I said, "Sir, please accept my apologies. I had no intent of ignoring you or hurting you." I said, "I just got caught up. I'm sure in the crowd, I don't even remember the event." But things like that can happen, that we just inadvertently make a mistake. Somebody passes us in the hallway and they say, "Hey, Bill," and you don't hear them. And you go on your way and they think, "Well, what kind of jerk is he? You know, who won't even talk to me." You didn't intend to do anything, but it can cause relocation. Now, here's the point, folks. The Bible is crystal clear for believers. Don't let fellowship remain divided. Sometimes we can't help it from happening, but we can do something about it when it does. We don't have to let it remain divided. Paul and Barnabas in the New Testament are a great example of that. Paul and Barnabas were the missionary partners on the first missionary journey of the church, Paul's first missionary journey. They sailed out of Antioch and they sailed to the Isle of Crete. And before they left, Barnabas told Paul, Barnabas was always wanting to include somebody else. I love Barnabas. That's his nickname was Barnabas, and it means son of encouragement, and he was always trying to encourage other people. And so Barnabas said, "Hey, Paul, I got an idea. I want to bring my nephew, John Mark. He's a young guy, he's green, but I think God's really doing a work in his life, and I think there's a lot of potential in him. I want him to come with us on this mission trip." And so Paul said, "Okay." And so John Mark accompanied them on the first missionary journey. He got as far as the island of Crete, their first stop. And Luke doesn't tell us what happened. We don't know. Maybe John Mark got sick. Maybe he just got homesick. Maybe he just got scared and thought, this isn't for me. I don't know. We don't know. But he left and he sailed back to Antioch. Well, Paul and Barnabas finished their first missionary journey, which was the shortest one. They got back to Antioch, but they began to tell all the things that God did and the Gentiles that were coming to Christ and churches that were planted. And the church was just all beside themselves and excited. And so Paul looked at Barnabas and said, I got an idea. Let's go on a second missionary journey. And it's going to be even longer. The second missionary journey was the longest missionary journey of Paul. And Barnabas said, man, I'm ready, sign me up. And he said, listen, Paul, he said, I know John Mark kind of messed up on that first run, but let's give him a second chance. Can we take John Mark with us on this second run? And Paul said, not no, but And Luke says there arose such a division between the two of them and contention over this that they split. And the Apostle Paul took another man by the name of Silas, and he became his missionary partner on the second and third missionary journey, and Barnabas took John Mark. Now, if the story ended right there, it'd be really tragic. We'd think, Paul, you're a hero of the gospel, man. You're a hero of the New Testament. What in the world? Give a guy some grace. Well, we find out later that he did. Because we find out later that Barnabas is reaching out to Paul to introduce him to some others. And when Paul is in house prison in Rome, he writes and says, send John Mark to me, for he will be profitable to me. They had a spat somewhere along the line. I wish we had all the in-between stories, but somewhere along the line, that spat was healed. It was restored. And John Mark goes on to be a very significant contributor to the New Testament and the New Testament church. So the Bible is crystal clear for us that when we get relocated, we don't let it stay. We get reunited. So what do we learn from this story between Jacob and Esau? Very simple. There's really only two parts. Number one, if you have offended someone else, and you know you have, you take initiative to go and restore unity. That means you get up out of your seat, or you get in your car, and you drive to their house, or you cross an aisle, and you go to them and say, I have wronged you. I offended you. I did this. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I want our relationship to be restored. You say, I don't think I could do that. If you're a child of God, you don't have a choice. You don't have an option. God's not saying, hey, if you think about it, if you'd like to do this, no. No, it's very clear. So what did Jacob do? Twice, Jacob intentionally hurt his brother. The first time, he swindled him out of his birthright. Now you say, well, what is a birthright? I don't really understand what the birthright is. The birthright was something that was material. It was tangible. It was very real. It was part of the estate of the father. And the way the birthright worked was that the eldest son, which would have been Esau, would get twice the estate or twice the inheritance that any of the other children did. So there's Jacob and there's Esau. There's two kids. So what Isaac would do when he got ready to die is he would divide the estate into three parts. He would give two to Esau and one to Jacob. Instead of getting half, Jacob gets a third. That's how important the birthright is. Well, how did he do that? Well, one day Jacob was cooking a pot of stew, and Jacob must have been a pretty good cook. And Esau comes in, and he's been out hunting. We don't know how long, but it's not been a good hunt. And he's tired, he's exhausted, he's famished, he is starving. And he tells Jacob, give me some of that stew or I am going to die. Now, listen, I've told Diana the same thing before. Yeah. Hurry up with that fried chicken or I'm planting right here. I'm going under right here. Starving. Or it could have been that he really was, dehydrated, maybe at the point of death, but whatever it was, Jacob looked at his brother Esau and he said, I tell you what, your birthright for a bowl of this stew. And Esau looked and said, what good is a birthright if I'm not here to receive it? So he ate the stew and he gave Jacob his birthright. And the second thing Jacob did was even more emotionally wrenching. Jacob tricked his father Isaac into giving him Esau's blessing. Now, a blessing was nothing material, it was no monetary value, but it was prophetic, it was very emotional, it was an honor that you received the blessing of the family. And you would pass that blessing on to your eldest. And so Esau should have deserved the blessing, but Rachel created a scheme. And she told Jacob, listen, your father has told Esau, go out and hunt some game and come in and fix him a stew. While he's doing that, you take a kid, a young goat, and you cook it, prepare him a stew. And before Esau gets back, you cover your arms and your face and your body with the skins of the animals because Esau was hairy. And you tell your father that you brought him the stew. And so he does. And Isaac's a little skeptical, he's suspicious, but he's blind, he can't see. And so he says, come here that I may feel you. And so he feels the hair and the fur of the animals. And he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the skin is of Esau. And he said, come here, my son, that I may bless you. And Jacob stole the blessing of his son, of his brother Esau. Now, Jacob had no doubt in his mind that he had done Esau wrong. There wasn't a question of this being mistaken. Oh, I didn't realize. No, he knew intentionally that he had done that. And I want to say this to you. Never, ever, ever underestimate the damage and devastation that can be done from intentionally harming someone else. If you got your Bibles open, look back in chapter 28. After he had done this, after he had stolen Esau's blessing, Esau said, I'm going to kill him. He's already stolen my birthright. Now he's stolen my blessing. I am going to kill him. So Jacob's mother calls him in and says, your brother is furious and she's going to try to kill you. And so Jacob's mother says, leave. Rebekah said, leave, get away from here until Esau has time to calm down and go find a wife. And Isaac told him, said, don't go find a wife among the Canaanites. That God told us not to do that. Go to the land of your forefathers, to Padan Aram, and find a wife there. We know Jacob did that. Took him 14 years. Ended up with 2 wives because his father-in-law tricked him. But he went to Padan Aram. Now look, here's the point that I'm making. In verse 8 of chapter 28. So Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan displeased his father Isaac. And Esau went to Ishmael. You remember who Ishmael is? Isaac's brother, Esau's uncle. And he married. Besides the wives that he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. And you know what Esau did? Until this very day, right now as I'm speaking, the descendants of Ishmael and Edom are fighting with the descendants of Isaac. Esau became the father of the Edomites, who became the seedbed of the Arab tribes. And they fought. They warred, even until this day. So I say to you, don't ever underestimate the damage that intentional harm can cause. So what does Jacob do? Jacob hears that Esau's coming with 400 men. Now, if you had cheated your brother and you had stolen his birthright and stolen his honor, and you got a message that your brother's coming to see you and he's got 400 guys with him, what are you going to think? Uh-oh is right. And that's exactly what Jacob thought. So Jacob sends a gift to Esau to try to make things right and to try to rectify things, to try to make restitution. But he's not the one that really took the initiative. Esau took the initiative. But Jacob does try to make restitution. So here's lesson number one. If you know you've offended somebody, take the initiative. Go to them before the problem gets any bigger and see if you can settle that problem with your brother. Here's number two. If you have been offended, if somebody has offended you, what are you to do? Take initiative to go to restore unity. Jesus tells us this himself in Matthew chapter 18, verse 5. He said, if your brother offends you, go to him. What? He did this to me. She said that about me. I'm not going to her. She needs to come to me. You know, we get in all these little pity parties, you know, pointing fingers. God's not messing around. God said, if you have been offended, you take initiative. So what does Esau do? Esau says, I'm coming to see you. And this was our text in chapter 33. He comes to his brother Jacob. And Jacob is filled with fear. He's filled with guilt. And in verse 4 of chapter 33, we see why Esau came. He came to resolve, to relocate, to bring the brothers back. And he comes and he falls on the neck of his brother, and they weep, and reunion is sweet. Now let me finish up with this and ask you a question. What are we to do? What are we to do? First of all, ask yourself this question. Is there someone you need to return to in unity? Someone you've offended? Somebody's offended you? Take initiative. Be that person that is godly enough to take the first step. Number two, understand this morning how serious God is about forgiving others and restoring unity. Listen to the words of Jesus on the Mount of Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6. I don't think Jesus is saying, if you're a Christian and you do this, you're going to lose your salvation, you're going to go to hell. I don't think he's saying this, but he said, if your brother offends you and you refuse to forgive your brother, know that your Father also will not forgive you in heaven. God's serious. God is serious about us taking the initiative to restore unity. Take initiative. Restore that relationship. Return to unity. You say, Pastor, it's beyond hope. Let me tell you something. I've been pastoring a long time, longer than a lot of you are living. And I have seen situations I would not have given a plug nickel that there could be restoration. Things may not always be exactly right. I'm not saying every marriage can be healed, every relationship can be restored, and sometimes you can take the initiative and you can go back and they can say, forget it, I never want to see you again. And that's a possibility. But you're not responsible for what they do. You are responsible for what you do. But I have seen situations where God would take the initiative of a godly woman or a godly man, and he would work a miracle. And relationships were healed. Relationships were restored. Why should we do that? God took the initiative to bring us back to him. Every one of us in this room have failed him and wronged him and insulted him. And God took the initiative by sending his son to come and die on the cross for us so that we could be relocated back to him. Let's be examples of him.